I am really struggling to find the right way to articulate this thought, which is complicated and messy in this kind of format, but I'm doing my best. So I have a theory that you're not really a real furry until you have like 1,000 hours logged on Fur Affinity. You could also like spend time in conventions, that counts too. In fact, convention time counts double, although it's a very expensive way to hit that kind of number. To be clear, this is facetious. It's not a sincere, actual, achievement unlocked gatekeeping requirement, but I do think it's interesting to unpack what these kinds of locations and websites mean, and also what every website means for furries. Because the thing that is under-discussed about the furry fandom is that we are a community that exists on platforms, and those platforms mediate how we communicate, what art we're allowed to have, and just how we behave in general. So I'm going to do the annoying thing where a millennial waxes philosophical about the old internet a little bit, but I want to try to explain what Fur Affinity was and kind of still is, and how that differs from every other option people popularly use. I know that other gallery sites exist. I'm not going to get into those ones so much because they're mostly analogous, but we're mostly talking about Fur Affinity versus where furries actually are a lot of the time, and the age gaps, the demographic gaps, the actual differences in opinion and even culture between these sites, and why there's so many sources of like conflict and division more recently in furry. There always has been, but it is different, and in some cases worse, because things are so fragmented and there's so many different gaps between younger and older people, because now furry's been around for long enough that there are people who hold onto old platforms and people who moved on to new platforms or were born on new platforms and experience this all completely differently. And that's really messy, because whether you want to admit it or not, furry is like a subculture. Like, we call it the furry fandom, but like that would put us alongside like people that have a lot of opinions about the amazing digital circus. It's like, that's really not the same thing, is it? Like, if you've looked at furry for 5 minutes, you're like, oh, no, this means something on some level, even if people are afraid to define it or even mentally resistant to defining it or engaging with that, because it's just silly animals and it's so, inherently goofy that it's hard to take seriously enough to actually try to hunker down and be a little philosophical or academic about it. So, Fur Affinity, when it came out, like 20 years ago, was essentially a carbon copy, in my experience, of DeviantArt at the time, which was the other gallery website that a lot of people used for art and so on. I was on DeviantArt first, and then I moved over to Fur Affinity, and the entire user experience was completely identical. DeviantArt has changed significantly. From my understanding, it's full of AI, but also has like algorithms and all this other bullshit, but Fur Affinity was from the pre-algorithm internet. So it was coming out back in an era where Twitter was a completely chronological feed of tweets with no filtering of who you saw in what order or virality on that kind of sense. You couldn't even make threads. Like, you would tweet and then you would tweet again separately. You could not attach your tweet to your own previous tweet and have a tweet thread. And there were only 140 characters. It was literally like you were just throwing a sentence into the wild. One at a time was how that website worked back then. Like, it was a very different internet. Facebook had the wall where everyone saw a feed chronologically of everything that their friends posted, and it did not show anything that wasn't what their friends posted, and it didn't change the order or try to make decisions for you. It was a very different internet. So in that sense, Fur Affinity is a gallery website where you upload your furry art, or your furry music, or your furry animations before Flash was destroyed. I think it still has a Flash feature, even though I don't think any of that works anymore. Or your furry stories. And what it would do is it would show up on the front page chronologically, and it would show up in your gallery chronologically. And you could visit someone's gallery and just look at all of their art. And there was, interestingly, 2 different types of Fur Affinity users. There was artists posting their own art, which is the normal way of having any art gallery website. That's how DeviantArt worked. That's just like, the stated purpose of these websites was to go on the internet, post art that you make, and then put it there. But users that just enjoy furry art would also make accounts on Fur Affinity, and they have their own fursona and so on. So they'd make a profile for their fursona, and then what they would do is they would get commissions or gift art and so on if whenever people drew them, they would upload art of their fursona to their gallery page. This really confuses people sometimes because it's like it's not how a lot of stuff tends to work. But there were two different types of profiles. There was artist profiles and fursona profiles, and sometimes artists would also have a separate fursona profile where they would post. Because like sometimes they'd post commissions that they got alongside stuff that they drew, but to avoid confusion, sometimes they'd make a second profile for their fursona, and all the art that they got would be there, but all the art that they made would be over here. I do the exact same thing. I have two furry accounts. One is Marrow Hyena, and the other one is Marrow Draws. I think you can tell which one's which there. So I have one website to this day, one page on Fur Affinity where I post every art of Marrow that I get, and also Null Playing Games fan art, which I might need to split off at some point for coherency. And then I have a separate gallery where I actually put the art that I draw. It's clean, it's straightforward, it's relatively quiet of a website, and fascinatingly, it's a website that has not changed forever. And so its popularity has dropped over the years in the furry fandom, and its relevancy has diminished to some extent. But it has been this nice pillar of a website that has stayed exactly where it has this whole time. And so I still use it to this day. And I think a lot of millennial furries do in particular, and a lot of younger furries don't, because they're very used to algorithms and apps and so on in a very different experience. It's a clunky website. You have to manually type in your tags and manually add your art to a folder and so on. But it does make it a searchable website. It's a browsable website. You can look up an artist on Fur Affinity, and if they're actually keeping up with their stuff, you can look at their stuff and actually see it and not have it be diluted by having to search through their media feed on Twitter and having to go through a million reaction memes and Genshin polls and stuff like that are all in the media tab, clogging it up. So these artist and commissioner galleries on Fur Affinity led to a very particular dynamic that I found interesting. And it's how I thrived in this thing, which is that we were self-directing. We weren't waiting for the Twitter or TikTok algorithm to show us what we're going to be interested in that day. We weren't passively sitting there and waiting to learn things. We were seeking things out. This was a philosophical difference between the old internet and the new internet, between apps and surfing the web. Surfing, inherently, that is a verb, that is an action. You are actively being proactive in what you were doing and not doing on the internet. That's a fundamental difference between these two ways of interacting with online, even though they'd be nominally the same idea. You would go on Fur Affinity, and you would maybe discover some stuff from the front page, the chronological feed, or you would browse, or you'd type in search terms of things that you particularly were in, be it cock or trains, and you would end up finding things related to your interests and slowly develop a network of interests and artists to follow and things. But there was also a particular way of doing discoverability back then, because we had discoverability back then, but it wasn't mediated by the algorithm. It was mediated by your own behavior and your own habits and this particular culture we had developed on Fur Affinity for how this kind of stuff worked, which is based on the dynamic of having artist galleries. And you'd have the fursona galleries. Obviously, intuitive, if you find an artist you like and you follow them, then you keep getting served all of their new posts in your inbox, which was a solid inbox of just like an email inbox. It works this way to this day, that Fur Affinity, if you follow somebody, it shows you every new submission they make in an inbox that you need to manually clear. It stays there until you manually clear it, or now, if it sits for 6 months, it'll clear itself eventually because that created server problems for them. But like, Fur Affinity works like email, which means you have complete control over what you see and how it all works. So yeah, you follow an artist, you get served by all their stuff and so on, and maybe you unfollow if they post 7,000 YCHs and reminders all the time, or maybe you stick around for years and years and watch them develop and change as an artist over the course of like a decade or two. That part's straightforward and normal. But sometimes you would start to recognize furries. The same way that you do recognize them at cons or on social media, you would start to recognize them from various commissions, because people pay artists to draw themselves in a variety of situations, and you might have a similar interest in those situations. So if you recognize a fursona that you think is cool or hot or interesting, or just seems to really, really vibe with your particular interests, you could follow that fursona page, and you could subscribe to them, and then you'd be served up any art that they post in the future, or you could browse their entire history on the website and go through all of their art pieces that they posted so far. And that would lead to you being able to find more artists that you like, because you'd be introduced to new artists, not just by artists supporting each other or by some kind of algorithm, but essentially asymmetrical word of mouth, asynchronous word of mouth, where you would look at a furry's history on the website and you would discover WFA or Kihu or Mish through them back in the day, through the commissions. So there was a symbiotic ecosystem of commissioner and commissionee that would lead to people zigzagging, like shoelacing back and forth between these two types of galleries and learning about different people. This would lead to you getting closer to various furries, but also learning about a bunch of furry artists, and you would keep learning about them either way. Like, I remember Dasa, the big tannish yellowish brown horned demon dragon wolf guy. I remember daughter or Kiyosano is like the dog otter with the bro cap and everything. Like, these are like characters I learned about, not because they drew, but because they kept popping up in types of art that I had an interest in, and I just exposed myself a bit for anybody who knows who those particular characters are. Like, you would have essentially, like, it feels weird to try to call them pop-ufers or whatever, because now that's based on like social media and so on. But like, these were people that were recognizable because of their commissioning habits, and would lead to you learning about new artists as a result, and you would zigzag and learn them that way. And it still works that way today. You can still learn about artists that way via that website, and I encourage you to do so. I think it's a very interesting way of browsing things, but also I think because we had a manual thing where we took charge of our own internet behaviors, we also had a much more reality-based impression of how a lot of this stuff works. You just got to see the objective experience of just who's on the website, what they're posting, why, how often they do it, and so on, and you just chose to spend your attention here or there as you did so. And furry was weird. It's still weird, but you can't see how weird it is a lot of the time because of the fact that it's so filtered. There are types of art that are not allowed on certain websites. There are certain types of art that do not succeed on certain websites. There are types of art that just do not have an immediate mass appeal, but has a niche group of people that would be interested in that kind of thing. And so those things find an audience on a place like Fur Affinity, but on Twitter, because it's not like an over cyan pinup, so no negativity towards over cyan, but it's just like, that's a very safe idea. It's just like having a dude doing the one arm up and the one arm down, and he's kind of ripped, and it's a low angle, and he's just a fuzzy soft boy, and it's like sexy, but it's also safe for work. Like, there's a specific algorithmic hotspot on how to create art that not only does well on Twitter, but does well in every single demographic of queer person that would potentially be engaging with the stuff, and is also safe to post on every single website that is currently popular. And that leads to certain people spreading more than other people, and certain ideas spreading more than other people. And that's what's dangerous, is that when certain ideas are allowed and certain ideas aren't allowed, it does lead to a situation where people are getting a filtered experience of their own fandom or community or subculture. Like, nobody would accept the idea that punks or goths or so on, or hippies and any other sort of like subgroup of people that has a semi-political, semi-artistic sort of interest in why they are together and what their overall group means and why and what it means to them and so on. They would not generally accept the idea of having their message be filtered by a third party that they have no control over, and is probably run by a billionaire that elected a pedophile to being the president of the United States. Whoops. But like, that's kind of what happens the moment anyone else has a say in this stuff. But on places like Fur Affinity, you just looked around, and that meant that you had to engage a lot of kinks, not engage with as in like participate in, but you would. If you're browsing the website and you're doing it in the NSFW mode where everything's going to show up, you're going to encounter weird shit. And some of it's queerness, and some of it's neurodiversity, and some of it's autism, and some of it's fixations and so on. But like, much like how there is somebody who will post 700 photos of trains on their Fur Affinity gallery, and we know, and that's exactly the vibe. That's like the stereotype, essentially. You'd also find a guy that posts like 300 art pieces of various characters or themselves and so on drowning. And it's like, huh. And it's like, we're not breaking any laws, and I can't even really argue this is immoral. But like, well, I don't understand. I don't understand. There's a guy that has like a cutesy art style of like sort of stick figure-y, twinky characters and with big eyes and so on, and he loves to frequently draw various characters dying in wars. Just like a bunch of people like having recently been shot, or they're like scared in a trench and so on. Just like a very specific, strange fixation. And that would be alongside the thirst trap stuff of like, this guy's really into bondage, that guy's really into a feat. But like, it wouldn't just be this very safe idea of what plays for the masses of like, oh, this person likes feet, that person likes size difference, that person likes tummy. It'd be like, well, this is a gallery full of somebody who specifically likes to like choke dudes out and then drone them, which is when you cover them entirely in latex and a visor mask, and now they're blind and they just are like a rubber creature thing. It's like advanced, like, it's like advanced BDSM bondage crazy stuff that is partially based on some elements of reality and partially based on crazy fantasy stuff. Some of it's Bodis Ripper stuff. Some of it's based on the idea, when it comes to like consent and so on, that in fiction there's a lot of people that specifically get a sort of therapeutic or psychosexual experience from the blurring of consent lines in fiction because of the fact that it gives them the permission to be ravaged, essentially, as the subject. This is a long understood element about like a lot of erotica that women read and so on, that is like seemingly stories where bad things happen to women, but then the women love the stories even though they're the subject of the bad thing happening. And it's like, because it's like, well, it's a freedom to have like it's the like female erotica equivalent of the furry trope of, oh no, I'm wandering through the forest in the woods, I hope a werewolf isn't out tonight, oh no, is the vibe. Getting a little off track here. But I think that we had essentially a more healthy understanding of kink and how weird it is, but also how to deal with it, and how to compartmentalize it, and how to very directly choose what to engage with and what not to engage with. Because like, it just is, we were used to seeing it on a daily basis, and you liked the weird shit that you liked, and you didn't like the weird shit that you didn't like, so you just didn't follow those people, and you just didn't engage with that kind of stuff. And then of course, furry made up a bunch of weird cartoonish stuff like vor and inflation and a bunch of other things that not everything's from furry, but there's a lot of it in furry stuff that's like cartoonish kinks that can't happen in real life. They can only happen in this weird art space where we make up and exaggerate various psychological concepts that come into play in sex and in power dynamics, but don't reflect reality. And sometimes that's why some of that stuff gets off scot-free as far as like the morality of art, because like vor almost always depicts a form of murder, essentially. Not always. I know. But it very frequently depicts a form of murder, but almost never is there actually a discourse about vor, because everyone's like, if you try to even do that, people are like, what are you talking about? It's cartoon animals swallowing each other. Like, I have a job, I got shit to do, I can't be part of this conversation, this is so stupid. But like, it's a lot of immoral acts happen in these pieces of art. There's a whole genre where somebody just kind of goes to town through the ear of someone's head, and then that person's entire consciousness and memories and personality are wiped out, either for the duration of that experience or forever. And it's like they're essentially the permanent gooner now, and that's like, it's both a traumatic concept and an upsetting death of ego and self, and also this weird perverse idea of like freedom and being released from all the shit you're dealing with in your current life and just becoming that mindless, dumb idea. It's things that explore concepts, and we're used to the idea that a lot of these are metaphor, and a lot of these explore particular ideas. But where that hits friction is Twitter, and on TikTok, and sometimes YouTube, and these places where people oftentimes start on these websites, and they don't know their roots. There's people in the furry fandom that are young, They grew up during the pandemic, so they weren't getting a lot of socialization within their own school community because they couldn't even go outside for a while. And they also haven't been to conventions, and they haven't put time on these like more neutral sort of objective spaces where furries engage on very neutral grounds. They haven't necessarily gone to fur meets and interacted with furries directly either. So they call themselves furries, and I'm not disputing that, but I'm just trying to open people's eyes a little bit about what they're thinking about here and what they're talking about here. They call themselves furries, but they only know furry through TikTok or YouTube Shorts or something. They're getting an extremely specific algorithmic feed of what a corporation allows you to see about your own queer fandom, despite the fact that almost every corporation is anti-queer. Like, there's shit to unpack about that and that kind of approach to all these things. So I have a very specific experience that I think is kind of enlightening to this stuff, which is that I was on my way back from, I think it was FWA or Anthrocon or something, but I was in the airport having just spent the last like 5 days surrounded by furries, having a great time, having a very pro-queer experience, a very fulfilling experience, made some new friends, maintained relationships with old friends, and just generally was just deep in it. This the very unifying and healing experience of being surrounded by furries and like us all being good to each other and so on. And the first thing I saw when I opened Twitter, because I was still on it back then, so there's a niche Japanese art subculture or genre called gyro. Is that what I understand it's called? And it's basically gore. It is oftentimes women that are cut up or missing limbs or blindfolded and just going through, it's like advanced BDSM stuff crossed with like upsetting sort of like horror and gore and so on. And my friend Stephanie, big fan of this stuff. She loves gory women and stuff. Like, that's it's just its own thing. If you fixate on it and you get something out of it, then it might do a particular purpose the way that like people love true crime or horror media and so on. Like, it's art, it's filling a particular psychological space, and there's reasons people engage with it, and it's not that weird, but you don't have to engage with it if you don't want to. Sexualized gore and all this other weird stuff. I look on Twitter, and there's somebody it's a furry who's calling out another furry, quote retweeting them, and calling them a serial killer because they're a furry artist that draws gyro. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but like they're drawing like that weird form of like, oh, it's a big crocodile man, but like he has his arms are missing and there's like cups over the stumps of where the things are missing and so on, and they might have like chains attached to those and hanging them up, and it's like, it is distressing. It's weird, upsetting horror art, but you can't say that somebody who draws horror or gore is a serial killer. And you can't say that it's a sign of somebody becoming a serial killer the way, like, you can't be like, oh, a child that abuses animals, he's going to be a serial killer one day. You can't say that about somebody drawing upsetting concepts, because those genres have existed all along. And I'm not the expert on what exact psychological purpose some of the stuff is serving for particular people. But like, once again, like, I grew up in the era of you look at what you want to look at and you don't look at what you don't want to look at. And gore can be hit and miss on how stylized or interesting it is, and sometimes people will have a whole gallery of stuff that doesn't appeal to you, and sometimes people will have a whole gallery of stuff that you find interesting. But instead of dealing with any of that, what we have is a Twitter furry who is trying to initiate a dog pile based on what they interpret as social justice, and they're using therapy speak to excuse what is essentially them doing harm to somebody who does not do harm. Like, this person's over here drawing art and sharing it with the people that want to look at the art, and this other person is calling for a harassment campaign against an artist for simply drawing a type of art that they don't vibe with, because they are young and think that they've solved all of morality. So they think that they understand that this art is immoral because it makes me uncomfortable. And I'm probably right. I'm 19. So they think that this horror art must be immoral and this person must be a bad person. And so they're doing a quote retweet, a call out, which is inherently and only really interpretable as being like, hey, everybody, look at this guy. Get him. And it's unclear what getting him is going to mean because you're all on social media. But yes, dogpiling people and throwing harassment their way and being cruel at them is harmful. Like, we are social creatures. We do need some level of social approval. Like, we're obsessed with in-group, out-group stuff. That's why so many people only like this body type on social media. Nobody will like me if I don't have a fursuit and so on. It's because people are obsessed about whether or not people approve of them and so on. So a mass shunning or a mass harassment, even from a bunch of strangers, does actually hurt people. It can even be traumatic to people, and it can shut them down. It can stop them from creating more art. It can stop them from going outside. It can lead to a lot of therapy appointments. So we have somebody who's doing something that's not harmful, but somebody else finds creepy. And so that person's like actively doing harm to that person. And because they think they're morally in the right, they think it's okay to do harm, and they're never going to stop to question whether or not they're the ones doing harm to somebody who's not doing harm, because they're just so certain in that gut feeling, which is the same thing as morality and ethics. It's so infuriating. It's so frustrating, because there's so many things that people on more modern social media platforms get the ick from, because they're underexposed to it, and oftentimes young, and often don't understand a lot of kink spaces, and often don't understand queerness or queer history or furry. And they will harass people that are just there. Like, I always think of that old comic where there's just like a bear just sitting in the woods, and then the woods slowly get overtaken by like a suburban neighborhood as all the trees get cut down and new stuff gets built. And the bear was sitting there the whole time, and someone's like, a bear! And he's like, I've been here the whole time. People just take that comic and they just write kink on the bear. And that's all you'd have to do immediately. It's like, oh, okay, this guy was doing this the whole time. And then the landscape of the internet changed, and now people are mad at that person for existing. And it's part of what I struggle here with is that these social media websites are just a linear feed of stuff that you don't consent to being on your feed. So on some level, being upset that you got to see another post from Rano Yin again, or you got to see another post from this or that body type, or this or that type of like social media attention gathering person, or weird kink that you don't want to look at, it does feel like a little bit of a violation, because on TikTok and on YouTube and Twitter, shit happens at you. You just sit there passively and let the internet wash over you, and then some of it you're not going to like, and then you blame the person making the art for doing that, instead of blaming yourself for being on a place where you don't make decisions. Whereas back on Fur Affinity, you just learned which galleries you liked and which galleries you didn't like, and you gravitated towards what interested you, and you gravitated away from stuff that didn't interest you. And there was just like, yeah, like over there's someone in a diaper. Over there's somebody drawing a beheading. Don't always want to unpack exactly what's going on there, but it is frequently not actually immoral. It's just something that gives you a gut reaction that you don't enjoy. But then you bring yourself to like go check out the things that you get drawn to, and then you talk to those people and you make friends and you meet them at conventions like this, and maybe one day you write a philosophical paper trying to unpack exactly what the semiotics of vor are. And that's where you go. That's weird, niche, queer, furry fandom shit. That is the roots of the entire thing, is kind of minding your own business while also engaging in the overall fandom and enjoying the collective like diversity and difference in that. And that's what people often mean when they say keep furry weird. We don't want corporate tie-ins for our particular stuff. And it's also more important to be on these kind of gallery websites and engaging with weird queer art than it is to be like, ooh, Nick Wilde, Disney approved cop character for us to thirst after. Like, that is two very different experiences. And one of them, and Zootopia 2 is the biggest animated film of all time. But treating just liking Zootopia as being the fandom, as opposed to actually what all the roots and the history of this whole thing is, leads to a detachment here. So I think a lot of the conflict we have in the fandom is tied to the fact that people are so frequently having completely asymmetrical histories about how any of this worked and what any of this means, and they often hopped on based on the aesthetics of fursuits or this or that thing, but they haven't spent enough time in community and within the culture and the art and so on to really understand what all this stuff was, and they're oftentimes letting a corporation tell them what their own fandom is. And I just want people to think about that more, because that's been one of the scary things about me growing up, is that like there was this idea that we were all going to become more and more tech literate as we went on, because it was, when I grew up, it was so common for all of us as like 8-year-olds to be helping our parents with their computers because we got it already and they could never figure it out. And so we were very conscious, and everything was destination based, and we were having to make a lot of decisions all the time and learn things all the time about how a lot of this stuff worked. But as time went on and we switched to apps and phones, and we have like a grid of apps, and that becomes your whole internet. Your whole internet becomes like 5 apps that you launch over and over again. You no longer open Firefox or Chrome to search out destinations and teach things to yourself and browse the entire internet based on your own curiosity. You're more likely to open TikTok, make 0 decisions, and just be served an endless feed of things and be mad when it's not what you want it to be. I frequently fear that we're letting them tell us what the internet is and what furry is. And we need to think about that more actively. It's not that it's bad to use each of these individual apps, although it's pretty bad to use Twitter because, once again, he did help elect a pedophile to be the president. Like, it is kind of crazy that people will be like, oh, you can't go to Harry Potter land, you can't buy a Harry Potter book, oh, you better not watch the new Harry Potter show, J.K. Rowling is evil. She's going to use that money to fund anti-trans lobbying, which is true. And she like smoked a cigar bragging about her successes in that field. It's upsetting. She's a devil. But then they use Twitter all day, and I promise you Elon Musk has done significantly worse. And do you really want to have Elon Musk be the mediator for what furry is to you? Because if your experience of furry is Twitter, which I'm going especially hard on today, do you really want to have your version of your queerness and your art community be mediated by the body standards and the transphobia and whatever algorithmic choices that Elon makes that flatter his ego? You want that to be your social experience? Because it is infiltrating your life in ways that you are not interrogating and being critical of. And that leads to a lot of unstated assumptions about how he's shaping your worldview. Although, fun fact, it's also not even good at being social media. So this isn't scientific or anything, but I did recently win an art raffle from Mocha, or Mocha Does Art. Very NSFW, do not look it up unless you're cool and also old. But I can only show you this much of it. This is the only part that doesn't feature anything lewd in the entire image, and it's a very small square. But fantastic art, very cool experience to win that. I got to share it with a friend of mine and rope them on it and had a good time with that. And out of curiosity, I checked what is going on with this piece of art on 4 different websites, because that's where Mocha is. Let's look at some stats. So first off, we have Mocha on Blue Sky. They have 7.1 thousand followers, and when I look at this particular piece of art that I got that I cannot show you, it has 1.7 thousand likes, 348 reposts, 3 quotes, and 6 replies. So not bad numbers. It is always rough seeing the ratio when you actually think about it, like the number of likes versus the number of replies, but like 3 quotes, 6 replies. Okay. People are engaging with that piece of art. People are talking about it. Mocha got to reach a bunch of people with that drawing, but also a bunch of people actually physically said things in it. There's humans in this equation. But if I look on Twitter, damn, Mocha has 14.4 thousand followers. That's more than twice as much. So I'm sure that this art must have done crazy numbers on Twitter, right? 1.5 thousand likes, so less than Blue Sky. 200 retweets. Less than Blue Sky. 0 quotes, 0 replies. Mocha posted this art into the world and got a bunch of ding notifications from someone clicking on it, technically. Are they people? Are they bots? Who knows? Not a single person said anything about it. They put probably dozens, if not 100 hours into this huge composition of this crazy art. Art takes time, it takes effort, there's vision in it, there's a bunch that goes into it. Not a single interaction where someone says a word at Mocha on the entirety of Twitter, despite having twice as many followers. For the record, it's on E621. It has 1 comment on E621. There are more comments on this piece of art on the porn site that people don't normally even make accounts for than there is on Twitter, which we charitably call social media. What the fuck is happening? But obviously, you know where I'm going with this, is I'm going to go, of course, to Fur Affinity. because Mocha's also on Fur Affinity. And on Fur Affinity, Mocha has a measly 1451 watchers. Nothing. Tiny traffic, right? Nobody's on this website. It's an old-fashioned pre-algorithm website full of bullshit and chunky upload messes, and it's a pain in the ass to use, and I have to manually go through my inbox if I want to look at anything. I just want to scroll. This is a pain in the ass. And yet, because it's the intentional internet, despite the fact that this piece of art has less than 800 views on the website, not likes, views, less than 800 people have looked at this piece of art at all. It has 3 comments. It has half as many comments as Blue Sky does, even though no one's there, because people are there to engage with fandom and social interactions and care about each other's art and comment on things and keep an eye on people. Like, it's just, Fur Affinity just has more in common with this than Twitter does. It's a space where furries actually exist and are there to talk to each other and interact. Because that's what a convention is, which I'm terrifyingly standing on the 10th floor of, and I do have a fear of heights, and depth perception is an experience I'm having right now, because I'm standing on the rail for a better shot. But, like, if you know what that staircase behind me is, and what floor this is, and what hotel I'm in, you do have a kind of healthier understanding of what furry is, and you're more likely to have more connections with people, and have a more fulfilling queer experience, and spend less time hating people for things that you kind of made up based on gut reactions to the art, and you're too busy being connected and having a healthier life. And so there's just like there's definitely a hierarchy here of how good for you different websites are, especially if you're talking about interacting with the fandom, because Twitter just isn't. It's just a call out every day about how this is why polyamory is bad. Cool, thanks. More division every single day and almost no actual pro-social behaviors. Go to a fur meet. I'm begging you. Anyway, this is a rant that I just cooked over the course of being at the gym today, where I was just like, oh, I need to get this off my chest and unpack this. This definitely has overlap with previous topics. It's also a part of my endless hatred towards Twitter, just trying to convince people to get off of that website, which I admit is on YouTube. And also, I'm stuck on YouTube because that's where my living is, and there are flaws to this approach of everything too. But I just want people to be more thoughtful of where they're spending their time, and specifically what it means. Try to be conscious of what your environment, not what it says about you, not status, but what it does to you. How does it shape your worldview? Because I cannot stress enough that so much of the furry fandom, it can only communicate and exist through platforms where everything they do is mediated by a third party. And you should be thinking about that and a bit worried about that. The most popular video on this channel is about how the entire furry visual novel space almost ceased to exist overnight because the lobby groups went after itch.io along other websites, and they just shadow banned the entire genre overnight. Just all adult queer art was just gone. That's like the only platform that entire genre can currently exist in, because you can't post a furry visual novel on Blue Sky. There's no upload 1 gigabyte zip file functionality on any social media. Like, you need itch.io for that, and it just went away. And it kind of came back, but like, it could have been gone. Ad Astra, Echo, Remember the Flowers, Burrows, The Smoke Room, all of those fucking games, that entire thing that was building for the last, 5 years, an important subculture of a subculture of furry, because it's mediated by third parties that are then attached to third-party payment processors, could have just been silenced overnight? The only people that should say what art we make is us. Hot take. Anyway, the furry conventions Q&A stuff is still coming. It has got a bit of scope creep. If you want to go onto the previous video, you can still ask questions right now. I'm trying to categorize all the questions into subcategories and then combine them into very askable, understandable questions. And then I'm going to send those questions. I'm going to interview people like a dozen different people with a bunch of different backgrounds and perspectives and so on, and then I'm going to edit those together into a series of videos that'll like hopefully get a more healthy and widespread perspective. And then I'm going to probably add a personal conclusion to each episode of that myself, having edited the rest of the video and gotten a sense of what the overall conversation is about, and then adding my 2 cents at the end. It'll be a very interesting series. It is labor intensive, and I do need to juggle that with every other part of my life, where it's like, okay, Tuesdays are date night, Wednesday is boyfriend, Thursday is the day where I write, because I have a day of the week where I schedule writing video essays. Wednesday nights are Null Playing Games, the tabletop channel that we run together. Then for like 3 of those days, I need to record Let's Plays, and that's like, oh, then before long, you're like, oh, that's the whole week. So I'm just fitting in time to compile all those questions in between, and then I'm going to do my best to try to make a series that is actually like a resource to people within the fandom to understand what furry conventions mean to people, what their strengths are, what their pitfalls are, advice on how to interact with them, and so on. And so please, yes, ask me questions on that video, not this one. I'm not checking here for those questions, and I'll do my best, because I would like it to be the kind of thing that is actually helpful. And if it does well, and it helps people, and it is received well, and so on, and everyone enjoys doing it, then like I might do it about other related topics throughout the fandom going forward, and like try to like keep getting other people's perspectives and compiling them into one big thing. Because at the end of the day, I'm just one guy. I was ranting about Star Trek 5 minutes before the first time I went into VR chat for one of these videos, and suddenly everyone started watching them. So like I fell ass backwards into having a sort of like furry influencer channel, and now it's called, I've renamed it to Marrow Hyena, because that's a less confusing name for what this has become. But I do take it super seriously, as you've probably noticed from how much I stress about these kinds of things, these platforms, and the way information is shared, who's sharing that information, what it means to people. And so like this is a side project of a side project for me, but I'm trying to, whenever I do make videos, be as thoughtful as I can about this kind of stuff. Like I'm not trying to model myself after a drama YouTuber or anything like that. I'm trying to model myself after like Hank Green, basically. Like if I can be like Hank Green's personal channel, but for furries, then like that is the space I would like to occupy, where I'm just like, I want to embrace complexity and nuance and actually discussing things for what they are, instead of just finding another reason to be angry all the time. But it's a journey. It's a journey trying to figure out what it means to run this channel, and what it means to exist in this space, and what it means to kind of speak for people, because you can't, it's very hard not to speak for people when you're in a thing like this. It's really weird of a field if you get down to it. It's why a lot of people don't take it that seriously, because that's a way of guarding your brain against what influence you might have. Is you just like, it's just YouTube, who gives a shit? And then whoopsie, you might make the world a little worse. I'm gonna sit down. I have a lot of shit to do actually right now, so I'll see you guys later. This was longer than I thought it would be, probably.